Hi everybody. Today we're talking about home care aid standards, qualifications, and training, and the differences between agencies, registries, matchmaking services, and hiring on your own. How many of you know the difference between a home care aid employed through a home care agency, reimbursed by Medicare or Medicaid, or hired through a registry, a matchmaking service, or privately? I can tell you that most consumers, patients, and family caregivers do not know, which is one reason for this video. If you know me, I answer questions caregivers ask, but I also provide perspectives from both sides. So, in addition to responding to the consumer, caregiver, and family side of this question, I'll also talk about home care agencies. So if you're a home care agency and you're not keeping up with employee training, it's very important to know the extent to which providing home care aid training and supervision and patient caregiver and family counseling and education is so critical to avoid having to defend your agency or your employees in any legal proceedings. Now, on the other hand, you may be an individual or a family caregiver. You're interested in hiring, or maybe you've hired an employee or an independent contractor through a registry, a matchmaking service. Maybe you've also worked with home care aids reimbursed by Medicare or Medicaid agencies. So, stay with me while I share two very important differences, because it's important that you know the benefits and the risks of hiring home care agencies and home care aids using agencies, registries, matchmaking services, or just finding someone that you hire independently. Because if you're a family caregiver, a family member who doesn't know the differences, you may incorrectly believe that your loved one, spouse, mom, dad, grandparent, is protected from harm, like a personal injury, a fall, personal property damage, a breach of care standards, or a breach of duty of care by this home care aid, or even elder neglect or abuse, or in extreme cases, wrongful death. That's where I come in. I'm a caregiver expert witness with 25 years of experience in home care, care management, and fiduciary work for the elderly and persons with disabilities in the areas of elder law, dementia care, care communities, home care, and long-term care. I've owned and operated 2 companies in these areas, and today I offer one-to-one consulting to families and caregivers worldwide. I do caregiving advocacy, and I offer expert witness services. If you're an attorney, a law firm, home care agency, insurance company, patient, or a caregiver seeking an expert witness, I'm Pamela D. Wilson. My website is PamelaDWilson.com. Links to the expert witness service pages on my website are below this video. Talk about home care, care management, guardianship, fiduciary work. So why is it important to understand home care aid standards, qualifications, and training for agencies, registries, matchmaking services? Well, when it comes to hiring or finding a home care aid, the question to ask yourself is, how much risk are you willing to take by hiring privately? How much time do you have to hire, train, supervise, and do all the tasks that any normal employer would do, or the tasks that a person hiring an independent contractor would do? Now, if you don't know the difference between hiring an employee versus an independent contractor versus a company, or becoming an employer of a home care aid, I recommend that you talk to a CPA, a certified public accountant, so that you are well informed. On the other hand, if you're a home care agency, How confident are you that your home care aides are appropriately supervised and trained to reduce risks related to breach of care, breach of duty, neglect or abuse, or professional boundaries? Whether your home care aides are working on the Medicare, Medicaid side of the business or on the private duty, private pay side of your agency. It's a lot to think about. Let's start with the definition of a home care aide. Home care aides are also known as CNAs, Certified Nursing Assistants. Typically, they are employed by a home care agency, and they have completed required training that I'll share in a minute. They receive ongoing training, ongoing supervision, background checked, even though I will say that some states do the minimal amount of background checks. And they have insurance coverage for any type of harm or injury to a client or a patient. Some Medicare, Medicaid home health agencies have a private duty side of their business, which means that consumers, patients, caregivers pay privately for this caregiver through an agency. Now, home care aides can also be employed by a private duty registry or a matchmaking service. Probably a lot like the ones you see advertised on television and the internet. They're like, oh, find and hire an independent caregiver for your loved one. So as you can see, all these descriptions I've given and the differences, oh my gosh, they can be very confusing for the average person to understand because there are so many options. But it's extremely important for you and the care of your loved one that you know the differences and you can make an informed decision if you need a home care aide. So to kind of go over this one more time, a traditional home care agency is reimbursed by Medicare or Medicaid. The private duty side of a traditional home healthcare agency is still an employer, right? But on a private pay basis. You pay them with money, retirement savings, cash. Most home care agencies are employers. Now, just the opposite over here, registries, matchmaking services, matchmaking marketplaces, again, like you see advertised on TV, they're not employers. They have no liability and take very little responsibility for the people that they connect you with. If you use a registry, a matchmaking service, or a marketplace, you, the family caregiver, you, the person, become the employer, or you're a person hiring an independent contractor who must be self-directing and pay their own taxes. While a lot of families and family caregivers that I know view registries and matchmaking marketplaces as a great deal, they're like, well, gosh, they charge much less than these home care agencies. It's important to know that there are hidden risks and hidden costs that nobody talks about until there's a huge problem. The same applies if you are hiring a home care aide independently. You find somebody at your church or your neighbors use somebody really great. You have to realize that if you hire through registries, matchmaking services, marketplaces, hire independently, you are the person taking the risk. So what does this mean and why is it important? The main answers are time, involvement, and the level of risk that you're willing to accept that I will share. So specific to time and involvement, you basically become an employer, or you have a relationship with an independent contractor who is this caregiver. So this means that you are the hiring, the firing manager, the supervisor, the scheduler, the person who has to show up when your caregiver doesn't show up, the manager, the person who runs the background checks, person who may be doing payroll or working with a payroll company or CPA to do payroll. Everything about that relationship with your privately hired home care aide relies on your involvement. So it takes your commitment and your time. On the other side of this, home care agencies, they are employers, so they do all of that. And the most important thing is they understand the requirements for training and competency of home care aides, also called CNAs. Federal regulations require 75 hours of supervision and classroom training and practical training for home health care aides. And after the initial certification, home care aides must continue to participate in 12 hours of in-service training, which are offered usually by these care agencies and supervised by a registered nurse. The important aspect here is ongoing supervision and training and education, along with a high level of attention to federal and state statutes for these home care or private duty home care agencies. It's extremely important. I have been in this field for 25 years. I can tell you that I have hired for my clients through agencies, and occasionally I used a registry when that was necessary, but there's a huge difference between a home care aide and a CNA and a companion. Differences in the level of care and attention and documentation and skills that they have. So if I have a choice, I would always prefer a home care aide. Now, let's talk about risk tolerance, because this is super important and rarely ever considered. This is why some people have issues when they hire caregivers. So if that home care aide you employ through a registry, matchmaking, service marketplace, or you independently hire them, if they harm your loved one, it's unlikely that you have any protection, any recourse, which means you have no legal rights to demand compensation or payment for anything that goes wrong. So, who then pays for personal injury? Your mom or dad fall down the steps and they break a hip, break a tailbone, break a neck. Personal property damage, neglect or abuse. Who pays for a lack of duty of care? If you are the person hiring independently, not using an agency who's insured, you probably pay one way or another, and your loved one pays one way or another. Let me share 3 stories of actual events that can happen in these situations so that you can gauge your degree of risk tolerance. Let's say that you privately hire a home care aide who comes to cook for your parents, and one day they make a meal and they leave the stove on and there's pots and pans on it, and they leave. Their shift's done, they're gone. And a fire starts and your parents' kitchen is totally destroyed, or even worse, your parents' home burns down with mom or dad in it. Number 2, your privately hired home care aide takes mom or dad who has dementia and uses a walker to the store. Now, mom and dad are usually inattentive. They may be impulsive. You know this, and the caregiver knows this. What happens? Caregiver pulls into the parking lot. Mom or dad gets out of the car. Caregiver gets their walker out of the back, and mom and dad just takes off, right? They don't look right or left. They just take off. Mom or dad is hit by a car backing out of a parking spot in that grocery store parking lot. They're knocked to the ground. They are seriously injured. All the while, the caregiver that you hired got a phone call and answered her cell phone while your mom and dad was standing there and taken off, when that caregiver should have been standing next to your mom and dad to make sure that they were perfectly safe in a busy store parking lot. Number 3, you directed a privately hired caregiver to make sure that your mom or dad, who smokes cigarettes and uses oxygen, is safe. This means no smoking with oxygen tubing in your mom or dad's nose or around their ear or even nearby. This means no smoking with an oxygen concentrator running. This means mom or dad have no access to cigarettes or cigars or lighters or matches or vape pens or anything like that. So what happens? Your mom or dad finds a cigarette, lights it, poof, they experience burns to their face, severe burns to their face. Their hair's burnt off, their eyelashes, their eyebrows are burned off because the cigarettes and the lighter that the caregiver was supposed to lock up in another room were not locked up. Now, let's be honest, we all know, or we should know, or there should be some education that smoking and flammable things and oxygen do not mix. But that doesn't mean that smokers can quit at the point that they have to use oxygen. So, if a person who uses oxygen is going to smoke, extreme caution must be taken to avoid injury, harm, fires, explosions, especially if they have any type of cognitive impairment or memory loss or mental illness. So in all three of these situations, your privately hired caregiver was inattentive. They breached their duty of care, and it's unlikely that there is anything that you can do to receive compensation for the harm because they don't have liability insurance. They have nothing that you can go after. Now, to be perfectly transparent, these same events can happen if you use a home care agency and a home care aide through a home care agency. But the expectation is that home care aides who retain their certifications, those who are supervised, who participate in ongoing training, including constant reminders about standards of care and professionalism, and those who have a care plan, because agencies have care plans. As a privately hiring party, you may not even know the things that you should be doing to make sure that your privately hired caregiver does their job. And if they're an independent contractor, you even have less control. So, expectation is that home care aides through agencies, even though you may pay more, or even though initially Medicare and Medicaid pays, there's probably less of a likelihood that they are going to cause a personal injury or personal property damage to your parents' home, or neglect or abuse your parents, or breach any type of standards of care. It can happen, but the likelihood is probably less. So now that you know a little more about home care aid standards, qualifications, training for agencies versus registries, matchmaking services, and hiring independently, you can decide. You can look at the benefits and the risks and make the best choice for you or a loved one. If you want to talk more about this, you can schedule an individual one-on-one consultation with me. The link's below this video. And if heaven forbid something unexpected happens and you need a caregiver expert witness to write reports, provide affidavits, or for testimony, you know where to find one. I'm Pamela D. Wilson, a caregiver expert witness. My contact information is below this video. I thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you soon in another video.